Welcome everyone. We'll wait a few more seconds before we get started just to allow everyone to finish filing in. All right, we might make a start there. And welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us today for our free partner webinar delivered by Komodo. A little bit of housekeeping for today's webinar. Any comments that you might have throughout the webinar, please feel free to pop them into the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please use the questions tab to its right. I'll be facilitating a Q&A with our presenters, a wide panel of presenters at the end of today's webinar. We're very fortunate to have a number of special guests with us today, and I'm very excited to introduce lead psychologist Alia Lindsay from Komodo. We'd also like to send a big hello to Chris Bacon, who's the CEO, who I know is online today. So Chris, hello to you as well, mate. We've been partners with Komodo for a number of years now, and it's been fantastic to watch their organisation grow. We love the work that they do. We highly recommend the work that they do, and we're really looking forward to today's webinar with them presenting on the topic of key data trends to guide school wellbeing programs. So Alia, with that, I'll hand straight over to you.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Jared. Hello, everyone, and hello from little old New Zealand. So what I'm hoping to do today is basically talk through some of the research and the current data trends that we have coming out of local research, actually out of Australia and New Zealand, and then also looking a little bit into what we know from the research so far post-COVID lockdown. And then, as Jared alluded to, we have some very special guests joining us from United World College Dilijan in Armenia. So I will introduce them as we get closer to that point. But in the meantime, follow along. So the first slide that hopefully you can see on your screen is just basically I want to turn your attention to what we know is happening for our students in Australia and New Zealand. So these trends that you see on the slide in front of you have been pulled from both the New Zealand research, which is called our Youth 2000 studies, which is done every 5 to 6 years on about 8,000 students across New Zealand. And what's interesting is the trends that were found in our latest New Zealand study also match what's coming out of Australia. So this, in particular, I'm talking about the South Australian Wellbeing and Engagement Collection research. So again, looking at about 12,000 students' data. And what we can see is some really similar and not so great trends when it comes to student wellbeing. So we know that student emotional and mental health appears to have worsened, particularly in the last 10 years. And what we know with this is there's increased distress of those students who are struggling. So we're talking about much more intense distress, difficulties that require much more intricate interventions, which also take a longer period of time. And what's interesting is we're seeing this trend is even higher in our female students. The other part on there is, in general, what we're talking about when we're talking about more distress and more difficulties is we're talking about depression and we're talking about anxiety. And in particular, we're looking at things, that I suppose the symptoms of these two disorders that are really interfering in our students' lives. So affecting their physical health, affecting their sleep, affecting their motivation to learn, and actually affecting their way of engaging with their peers as well. So whilst this starts as a mental health and a wellbeing issue, it actually expands all adolescent development and starts to interfere in lots of these socio and emotional developmental milestones we'd expect. And the last point on that slide is probably no news for anyone listening in, but we know that student wellbeing is very closely linked to academic performance. So we see this correlation between poor mental health and poor wellbeing outcomes being associated with poor academic performance, which makes sense. If students are struggling to manage their wellbeing and their mental health, how are they able to engage with learning and pay attention in class and be motivated for their education? So none of this, for me anyway, when I looked at this research, none of it seems all that positive, but also none of it seems all that shocking. I mean, this is what we're seeing in our students and with the schools we've been working with. the same trends are popping up, whether you're in Australia, New Zealand, or in other parts of the globe. So if we look more specifically, we have to consider what COVID has presented for our students, and in particular what lockdowns have how they've affected our students. So this research isn't out of Australia or New Zealand, but this has come out of the UK. And what it's suggesting is that students typically fall along a spectrum and fit into one of three categories. So we have the first group of students who, for lockdowns, actually thrived, and their well-being and their development surpassed what the kind of natural trajectory was. So these are our students who have a really supportive home environment, have access to their education despite being in a lockdown situation. They're not experiencing bullying, their home is a safe place, and they've continued to engage well with education. We've then got this middle group, and the best way to sum up this middle group is that their development has essentially been paused. So they're mildly affected by the lockdowns, but their trajectory of development for now has been paused. It doesn't mean that it can't bounce back, but we're just seeing these students have almost muddled their way through lockdowns, have tried their best to engage, and these are often students that may have actually had difficulty continuing to engage with education through lockdown. So whether that is difficulties with device access, with Wi-Fi, not having space within their home to study because it's too crowded. These are typically the students in this one. And then the last area are the students for whom lockdowns have had a really negative impact on their development. So by taking away the safe haven of school, students are finding themselves in increasingly negative interactions, and the priority of education and schooling is dropped further and further down for these particular students. So whilst this is coming research out of the UK, we do know anecdotally that this is also what we're seeing in our students in Australia and New Zealand, particularly if you look at the states in Australia who have had some of the longest lockdowns kind of in the globe. So just this last point on what we know post, well, I suppose we're not really post-COVID, unfortunately, yet, but the data that we've got so far tells us that actually the students who were already struggling with learning or mental health, they've had the most difficulty when it has come back to transitioning back to school post-lockdown, and what that means for, I suppose, our interventions and our pastoral care teams and how we support and identify those students. The second point on there around media exposure, so it's acknowledging that in the past 18 months, we have probably had more negative increased media exposure than ever before. Everywhere you look, whether it is on your phone, on your device, on the radio, on the TV, everything tends to be COVID-centered in one way or another, and that's definitely having an impact on our students' wellbeing. The other thing to acknowledge is the pause on interventions. So the obvious restrictions that come with lockdown, some of our additional services have not been able to work remotely, have not been able to engage in telehealth and things like that. So for some of these students who were getting the help they needed, things like lockdown has posed a big barrier to their interventions. Now, the last one is really interesting on there because that is from Australia and New Zealand research, and that's showed us that disordered eating behaviours has increased with lockdowns. So I'm not talking about a clinical diagnosis of an eating disorder, but disordered eating, and some of the assumptions around that have been the pressure of just being in a home environment where food, again, because of the monotony of the day, has become a focus point. The other assumption that is being made in the research is that kids and students are spending a lot of time, like we are, on Zoom or whatever medium you use, where they are seeing their face and seeing their reflection so much more than what they ever have before, and possibly the comparisons and reflections of self that come with that. So I suppose what this data is showing us is we know that in general, student mental health and wellbeing isn't in its best place right now. So we need to do something. We also know from the research that COVID has presented unique difficulties on top of what was already sitting there. And whilst this kind of global data is very helpful and can help us guide, I suppose, more local interventions, regional interventions and policies, is we know that despite all of these things, every school also has its own unique environment and its own unique climate. And I suppose that is where something like Komodo does come in. And what I have up next is just some information that we pull from our database of research. And what we've got here is, hopefully you can see on your screen, we've got a snapshot of the wellbeing scores of a school here in New Zealand. And what you can see in that top left graph is that the wellbeing scores start to decline at the end of that graph. And that was as the school entered a lockdown. So here in New Zealand, that meant that all students were back working at home. And what this tells us, I suppose, is the environment has changed, the wellbeing scores have changed, so we can use this information for intervention. What you can also see on the bottom right of the screen is that data has been analysed further, and we can see that what is contributing most to this decline in wellbeing is the social interaction scores and the school life scores. So what this tells me, looking at this data, is I know that student wellbeing should be a focus at times like this. I know that COVID poses its own unique difficulties, but my school, my students are particularly struggling with the lack of social interaction and feeling disconnected to their school life at the moment. So that is where I put my energy and that is where I put my intervention. I hope that I'm really selling here that data is important and data can guide our interventions if we let it. So the last slide that I have for you here is again pulled from our Komodo database, and this is a school based in Australia. And what you'll see is on the left, there's some fairly steady wellbeing overall scores. But in the bottom right, what we can see is despite the wellbeing scores being stable and not cause for concern, we can see that overwhelming, the reason that students are wanting check-ins is for stress and for motivation difficulties. So what this data, whilst the wellbeing score hasn't declined or plummeted yet, is I have this information that a large bulk of my students are struggling with stress and motivation. So I can choose to be proactive and put something in place now instead of waiting for those wellbeing scores to plummet before I do something. So what I am hoping that I have got across so far is that data is important. We need data to make sure that we are putting our time, our energy, and our usually limited resources in the right place for our students and their wellbeing. We can kind of do it in an ad hoc manner and hope for the best, or we can use data, whether that be the global information we have from published research, or whether you have that more intimate school-based data on your own unique climate, using that information to direct intervention and initiatives. And on the flip side, being able to evaluate, being able to see whether these things have made any difference. Data, data, data. So that is enough of me talking about my passion for data collection and the importance of this kind of evidence-based research. But now I would like to hand it over to our very special guests. So we have, first of all, we have Madhu and Jean McKelly, who are, Madhu is the head of science and head of residential life and the safeguarding lead. We also have Jean McKelly, who is a clinical psychologist and psychotherapist and a part of the pastoral care team. And we also have two of their students joining us as well. And what I am hoping these guys are going to portray for you is their experience of using data to shape interventions. And I think it's going to be awesome actually to also hear the student voice of what this has been like to be on the receiving end of this and whether needs are being met. So I do know that there is a video coming first to help set the scene of the unique environment that this school sits within. So as I mentioned, they are based in Armenia, and they were the first international boarding school based in Armenia as well. So Jared, you can feel free to hit play.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having us as guests today. First of all, I want to introduce the United World Colleges for those of you who don't know the movement, and then we'll move on to describe some features about our residential life and the use of data that can support staff to understand and to intervene on the well-being of students. The United World Colleges are a movement that was founded by Kurt Hahn after the Second World War in order to use the education of young people as a tool to promote international and intercultural understanding. Now, the main idea of UWCs is selecting students from all around the world, students from diverse backgrounds who are like different because of ethnicity, religion, walk of life, and invite them to study and live together for 2 years, the last 2 years of high school, and learn from each other. So the idea is to have like different students who can develop not only their cognitive skills, but also their emotional and social skills. And much more than that, who can learn to care for each other, care for others, care for the environment, and care for a sustainable future. The first UWC, UWC Atlantic, was opened in Wales in 1962, and now there are 18 schools all around the world, and more than 150 national committees which select students who then come to UWC. Madhu will now speak about our school, UWC Dilijan, and about the residential life in our school. Madhu, over to you.
Thank you, John Michele, and hello, everyone. I'm Madhu, and it is great to be here today. First, I'm going to give you a brief background of our school, UWC Dilijan. We are a fully residential international school in Armenia for 16 to 18-year-olds doing 2 years of IB diploma program. Armenia is a country at the crossroad of Europe and Asia on the famous Silk Route, and Dilijan is a small town in Armenia known as the Switzerland of the East due to its natural beauty. This year, we have 214 students from 80 nationalities and about 30 faculty members from 18 countries. This diverse community, on one hand, gives us the experience of a mini world. On the other hand, it poses a challenge as how to cater for the different needs of these youngsters coming from different culture, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, and socioeconomic background. Now about our residential structure. We have 6 residences with a maximum of 36 to 40 students of mixed gender in each, looked after by a house parent who lives in the same building with his or her family. Each building has 2 corridors and each assigned to a particular biological gender. We have 3 male and 3 female house parents in total, with a good balance of different nationalities. The residential team comprises of these house parents, a medical team of 1 resident doctor and 5 nurses, John Michele as the school psychologist, a visiting female psychologist, and me as the head of this team. COVID has affected us all, especially our youngsters and their mental and emotional health, as Ilya mentioned in her presentation. To improve on the well-being of our students in the COVID era, with numerous lockdowns, online lessons, and general uncertainty, we were researching on how we can empower our students to become more aware of their own well-being and how we can be informed of the needs of these people, these students in our care. We got to know about Komodo, a well-being software, through ABSA. Komodo is an app as well as a web-based software that gives our residential staff a picture of how well our students are doing in the residences. It also gives the students the same picture about their own well-being. Their sleep quality, energy level, work-life balance, stress level, etc. are measured through surveys, and we can analyze the data to put informed measures in place to support our students. The most powerful tool to me is that the students in our care can request a check-in with an adult at any time with just a click of a button for any emotional, physical, or other needs. You will hear from the students a little later, but now I will hand over to John Michele again to talk about the provision of psychological support in our school and how Komodo is being used. Over to you, John Michele.
Thank you, Madhu. So my role as a school psychologist is to work basically on 3 different levels. One is to provide psychological support. The other one is to work on prevention of distress. And then I think the third and maybe like a very important level too is to work on promotion of well-being. And this is done through a number of different activities. I provide psychological counseling and psychotherapy, and the students can approach me spontaneously. They can come to my office, ask for an appointment, or they can be referred to me by their house parents or other staff in the community. Then I train and supervise a group of peer listeners. So 2 students per residence are invited to become peer supporters, and they go through a year-long training, a weekly training and supervision with me. And then Nele and Yusang, that are like 2 peer listeners for this year, they will talk more about their experience as peer listeners and as students. And then I work closely with the residential life team that Madhu has just described. And I'm present also in several other formal and informal activities with staff and students. For example, sessions on life skills, or presentations during focus weeks, or class activities in which the presence of a psychologist may be required to facilitate the interaction of students. Now, well-being obviously is an important component of the UWC experience. We heard about the impact of the pandemic on mental well-being. which, I mean, I think that the pandemic had, of course, an impact, but it also brought to light some issues that were already there. Now, we believe that it is essential for the school not only to provide support and then intervene on prevention and promotion of well-being, but also somehow to monitor the well-being of students. And this is why we started to look for tools that could allow us to understand more regularly how students are doing, and that gives the possibility to students to communicate how they are doing. Last year we started to use like a standardized questionnaire in order to do this, but we thought that we needed to improve, and that's why we thought about the use of a software and an app that can be also user-friendly for staff and the students that can support this goal. Of course, as also Madhu was saying, the presence of house parents and mentors goes already in this direction of giving support. But I think it was important to count not only on people, but also on some tools that can enrich this level of care. And yeah, this is where like Komodo, of course, came in. Because the idea was like to allow students to reflect regularly on their well-being, on different items related to well-being, like homesickness, bullying, screen time, sleep, health, social interaction. The idea was also to remind them of the importance of well-being and self-monitoring, also give a feedback to the school, and ask for help more easily. Now, this goes in the direction of promoting a culture of well-being. So not only wait for students to ask for help spontaneously or be referred for help or approach a peer supporter, but regularly fill in a questionnaire about, for example, some of the items that I was mentioning, reflect on them, see, for example, see themselves if there has been like any change in their well-being, and maybe like ask for a check-in. And what is happening now is that we actually receive constantly this feedback. We, as the residential team, can use this feedback to reflect on the school's well-being, so identifying also areas of distress that, as Ilya was showing, Komodo allows to identify and to detect, and then compare hypotheses with data. So not only, this is not only like what we have in mind, but also checking what the students are saying through a software, through a questionnaire. Then another like very important feature is that we receive instant notifications if any student asks for check-in, and in this case usually the head of residential life can ask the house parent to go and check on students and maybe follow up with them, maybe refer them to a specialist if they need a different level of support. And more than this, of course, the students, they seem to find this tool user-friendly to reflect on their well-being and also to give a feedback to the school. I think that also like a very important feature of the software is that it can be customized, and we are working in this direction with the Komodo team, so that apart from a built-in survey, we can also add some, for example, like another standardized questionnaire that can help the school to improve even more in monitoring or even like measuring the well-being of students, so that we can have a better idea of, for example, how the emotional atmosphere in a residences, or how the emotional atmosphere among students in the whole school is. But I think, apart from my words, I think now it's important to listen to two of our students, Neil and Yusang, who are invited to be here because they are not only students, but they're also peer listeners in the school. So we want to hear from them who the peer listeners are, how their experience is in the school, and how they and the students are using the Komodo software. So Nele, Yusang, we'd like, now it's nice to listen to your voices.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Nila, and I'm an international student from Australia, actually currently studying in Armenia. As Jean-Michel mentioned, I'm also a peer listener at the school. So the peer listeners are 12 students who receive special training from Jean-Michel himself around student mental health and student support, and it is a unique system that we have of peer support. So where students are actually able to engage in a less formal setting with their peers to support them with any struggles that they may be facing. And the idea is that it is like a less intimidating environment. So instead of necessarily talking to an adult straight away, you can get more of a perspective of someone your own age. So even though in a residential school, we are extremely fortunate to still be able to see and live with our friends during times of lockdown, we also still face, the same challenges of the lockdown, being far away from home, and also the usual academic stress that comes with completing your last 2 years of high school. So despite being in a fortunate position, we do still deal with these struggles. And Komodo is actually something that has really helped us with that. So prior to introducing Komodo in the school, I know for myself at least, obviously there's connections, you're always told there's connections between your sleep pattern and your academic well-being or your social well-being. But I think since using Komodo, it's really allowed me to draw those connections. So when I'm filling out the survey, we have a house meeting each week where we're asked to fill out the survey. And during this time, when I'm, for instance, filling out the survey and I can see, oh, last night I didn't sleep so much. And then I also think about how I've been feeling this week. It draws a direct connection for me. So I can actually see that correlation myself, which has really been eye-opening to me. And it puts it kind of on paper, and it really makes you aware that there is a genuine connection between these factors. Furthermore, as a peer listener, Komodo has also really helped us. We have a weekly meeting with our house parent. Obviously, our house parent is someone who has access to all the data. So every week, our house parent also, judging off the Komodo data, obviously within the realms of confidentiality, is able to share certain things with us peer listeners for the coming week. For instance, certain groups of students that we should keep an extra eye on or support further that week, or certain issues that have been causing stress or distress in the past week. So that it's an extra tool that we have to know what the focuses of that week should be. So it has been a really helpful tool for us.
Now for my side, first of all, hello everyone. I'm Yuseng and I'm also an international student, but from Colombia, from the opposite side of the world. And I wanted to add a bit more in terms of the use of Komodo here in our school. And I also want to coincide with Nile in terms of how it has been such a useful tool for us, as it is a very reliable way for us to measure our own well-being. Of course, we know that for a great part of our days, at least us in our age range, we're constantly with this little thing in our hands. And it's very, very useful and very reliable that, let's say, Komodo gives us a sort of an interface that is very easy to use. And that, of course, in the end, it's another tool to help us, as well as Lily said, with measuring ourselves, our own well-being. Something that I have seen in each survey that we have to fill in around like every 14 days in our turn times, as Lily said, is that it's given to us in some sort of qualitatively, let's call it categories, so that we don't have to follow the normal or the usual system in which we have to rate ourselves from 1 to 10, but it's actually using words as I'm feeling good, I'm feeling regular, I'm feeling average, I'm feeling very bad, to actually qualify how we're feeling instead of using the normal numbers. But that at the same time has been used from the side of Komodo or from the side of data analysis as taken as quantitative data that can also be analyzed, and it's not only the simple categories given to us. And at the same time, something that I found very, very, very useful in terms of measuring ourselves, it's also the way in which the app breaks down all the different categories. I can see here that we have around that's around 15 different categories in which we can see our breakdown for the very, very, very different weeks that we fill in the different surveys. And we can kind of track through a different graph a bit of how have we been feeling, how that may have a relation with, let's say, our general schedule or our general life. In terms of that week in specific, we may have 1 week in which we have, well, I have that exam, I have that different club. I have these many classes and I have these many projects to do. So of course we also see and we also track ourselves. I may be doing something wrong. Am I balancing correctly my social life and my academic life? And the best way to see it is visually, not only recalling for the different moments in the different days, because of course, talking about such a hectic life in which we're constantly active and moving from one point to another, it's kind of difficult to give ourselves that small time of the day to reflect and to think about how we are feeling. But that, of course, is also going to influence greatly our performance, our well-being in general in the school, which is in the end what actually help us take advantage of this opportunity. So, of course, using Komodo in a very short survey that is given to us in qualitative categories, then it's very easy for us to just take 5 minutes of this little device and just sit down, fill out a survey, and then at the end get some feedback to actually understand how we're feeling and if we have certain things that we should change so we can handle our life better.
Thank you, Nele Yusang, for describing and bringing your experience here. I think it's really important also to hear your points of view, and which also somehow I think shows and support the idea that well-being is very much connected with the possibility for all of us to process our experiences, and of course reflecting on our experiences is the key. So if a software can additionally support this possibility, I think we should do as much as possible to support the well-being of students and to promote it in our schools. I hand it over now to Jared and Ilya so that you can go on. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. And a special mention to thank you guys as the students. It is invaluable to hear a student voice and a student's perspective on this. And I think listening to you just now, what has really stood out for me is how much students actually value the learning that is coming for them as well and understanding their own well-being. And I wonder if that's a part of these interventions as well, is that it doesn't always need to be the staff and the pastoral care team that solve all these problems. If we can arm our students with a way to monitor their well-being and to reflect on their own data, maybe they will meet us more than halfway at solving some of these problems. So thank you very, very, very much for that perspective, and thank you for waking up nice and early to join us on this webinar this morning. Very much appreciate it. So the last slide that I have here is just what I think are the most important messages here. We all have to acknowledge that the state of student wellbeing and mental health has declined, and particularly the research suggests more so in the last 10 years than ever before. And COVID-19 does play a part of that, and particularly the lockdown environments that have come. These are such unique circumstances that students and teachers alike, they never thought that they would be managing for such a long period of time. So we really do need to acknowledge the additional stress and impact that COVID-19 has had on our students. The third point on there is data. This is one of the most powerful tools that we have for intervention design, for reflection and evaluation. And I think the really important thing that I've got on there is that data without direction causes distress. So we need to collect data that we are going to do something with. It's not about just running a survey for survey's sake. Whether you're using Komodo, paper surveys, standardized psychometrics, make sure that you know what you're looking to help and support your students with. What is the function of your action, so that then with the data, you can do something with it. And then the last point there, I think, matches brilliantly to what we've heard from the students today, is that students actually really value the chance to give information on their wellbeing, whether it be for their own personal reflection or, as Yusang said, using their phone to easily engage and provide that information to someone who might be able to support or be in a more specialist role to be able to support like in the pastoral care teams. I think as well, we need to remember that schools, and particularly boarding schools, are in such a unique position to promote wellbeing for students because of the amount of time and the amount of interactions that we have with students. And I think it's really important that we don't take that for granted. And so if there is a way that we can implement and use data to make sure we have more accurate and more valid interventions, then we should be taking those opportunities wherever we can. So there is a list of references if anyone would like, because that's me, a research buff. But the other thing I did want to mention is I do have some hours aside tomorrow for any of the ABSA members. If you're wanting to explore anything that we have talked about today any further, we've got kind of half an hour slots, which you are more than welcome to book into, and I can add the Calendly link into the chat if that would be helpful, Jared. But again, this is more about, it doesn't need to be about Komodo, it can be about how do we problem solve what's going on in your school, and is there a way that we can weave data collection into what you're doing so that your school is moving in a direction that matches the students' needs. So that is me. I'm not sure, Jared, if there's any questions or if anything else has popped up, but I would like to say thank you again to our team over there in Armenia, and it has been a pleasure to see you all.
Very good, Olia. And I just wanted to thank you so much for your wonderful presentation and being with us today. Of course, to our team of special guests from over at UWC Dilijan, it was so great to hear your positive experience that you've had so far. And no doubt you will continue to have with Komodo. We have had a few questions come through and some targeted at everyone. So I'm hoping you all might be okay to answer a few questions. And if anyone does have any other questions or comments, please feel free to pop them into the chat box or the questions tab, and I'll make sure we ask those to our panel. The first question here, Maru, I might ask this one towards you. It just says, what difference has Komodo made since being put in place at UWC Dilijan?
Okay, so I would say that, of course, I said our structure is under the care of a house parent. There are 36 to 40 students, and naturally the house parents do check on their well-being from time to time. But because of this check-in system, because of students being able to monitor their own well-being and ask for help themselves, it is a much faster way of ensuring that they're doing well, or an intervention has taken place and students are being supported in the right way much faster than it used to be. Of course, sometimes also you would know that some students wouldn't like to ask for help because the teenagers, they sometimes want to be, independently managing their own problems. But since we have the data now and we can see the data, so then we can intervene even when they're not asking for help by going there, chatting with them and saying, look, I've seen this, what's going on, let us know. And then, of course, they open up. So this is helping us a lot more, and we can do faster interventions.
That's a very good point that you make there. And Nele and Yusang, that leads us into our next question, because why do you as a student want to open up through Komodo? Yusang, I might start with you.
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Why do you as a student want to open up through Komodo and feel like you have the confidence to?
I need to give it a bit of a think. Why don't we go for Nele first?
Yeah, Nele, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think asking for help can be a bit intimidating sometimes. So I think, especially if it's face-to-face, so Komodo not only allows me to first, reflect on my own well-being, personally, it's private as I'm filling it out. Obviously, the data then does go to the school, but it's not I'm having to tell someone face-to-face how I'm feeling. I'm able to do it in a form. And also with the check-in procedure, again, it's not like I have to justify why I need a check-in or I need to go to someone and explicitly ask for help. I can just click that button and say, I'm not doing well. And then someone will approach me and have a conversation. So I don't actually actively need to to write a justification of who I want to talk to, why I want to talk to them. It's just once I press that button, it is then with the school, and they will make sure that I get the support that I need. So they will find the most suitable person to talk to me about what I'm feeling. So it's been very helpful.
Yeah, very good. Very well said. Yusan, did you have any thoughts as well?
Yeah, I mean, adding up to that, sometimes when some sort of issue comes to us, it's quite difficult to sit down, as Nida said, and just write an email for someone. And I think that Komodo has helped quite a lot into giving ourselves, let's say, a new bridge that connects us with our own well-being and with the, let's say, the relevant people that can actually help us. And the fact that it gives us these different tools to actually see how we're doing. It has also, I also feel like, as Nina said, it has somehow empowered us to first understand further into how we actually feel. Not the typical answer that we give to people like, how are you doing? Yeah, I'm doing good. No, but like actually, I'm feeling like this. And if I need to do certain changes, they have to be done like this. And at the same time, once again, like giving us another tool for, again, communicating to the relevant people. If, for example, if we're feeling somehow strange or we're feeling somehow a bit bad, then we can just press the button and we know that probably either a person or a message are going to arrive in the next 2 minutes.
Very good. While we're speaking to you guys, have either of you found the software challenging to use at all? Nelly, might start with you.
Not necessarily challenging. I think it can, maybe a challenge that arises, it's not necessarily a negative thing, is it does actually make you confront what you're feeling. So, you know, it does actually, you do have to go in and be honest with yourself and be like, well, I'd like to say I got 8 hours of sleep last night, but I really didn't. And you also have to be honest with how stressed you're feeling. So I guess it's a personal challenge to actually be honest with yourself as you're going through and filling out the survey. Which is a little bit difficult, but I think the more you get the hang of it, you do actually start to see those connections come up. So it is encouraging to then be able to see, okay, well, I didn't sleep, so the stress that I'm feeling is a little bit more justified than I might think. So I think, yeah, that's probably been the biggest challenge for me, especially at the start. It was a little bit confrontational at times, but it to a positive impact. So yeah, that would be the challenge for me.
Yeah, very good. What about you, son?
Well, as I said a while ago, while I was presenting what we have done with Komodo, I feel like I haven't found actually like any like strong challenges with the app, because of course, again, I feel like it has such a great way of asking us, again, adding up to what I said before. It's not only a scale from 1 to 10, but it gives us like a small slider so that we can move around the different categories. And that helps me quite a lot when, for example, I'm not too sure about, yes, I'm feeling good, but I'm feeling like good, but on the top borderline. And sometimes I'm feeling regular, but on the bottom borderline. And that actually, the interface and how the data is presented to us, it's actually more than challenging, actually very, very, very helpful.
No, very good. John McKelly, I might ask this one to you. How does the data provided by Komodo help with your strategy?
Yeah, thank you for the question, because I was actually thinking that, you know, Komodo does not only empower the students and make them a bit more also proactive in asking for help, but it's like a very important tool for staff, because, for example, in the residential life team, we need data to reflect on what we need to intervene on. So this is not only, let's say, our own ideas about how the students are doing, or we do not count only on some qualitative data, but we can also count on more quantitative data in this case. So, for example, if we, from the feedback coming through Komodo, we identify that maybe like in this period, like sleep seems to be a problem for the student, or homesickness, or social interaction, then we know that there is like an area in which we need to work as a team, and therefore, for example, we can organize a conversation in the residencies about that topic, or we can discuss with the house parents if any like more specific strategy can actually help the students and us to to process it or somehow to identify some possible solutions.
No, very good. Our next question.
Gerard, can I give an example?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yes. So suddenly, 3 days ago, of course, we were in lockdown and we were opening up. We opened up yesterday, and so I saw somebody wrote, "I cannot keep up with this lockdown anymore. I need nature. I need fresh. I need to get out of campus." So immediately, my reaction was to the outdoor team. On Saturday, when we open up the first outdoor trip, please include this student in that trip. So this is the kind of thing you can do even without a measurable data. You can see what the student needs and you can act on it straight away. Sorry to cut you off there, Jared.
No, not a problem at all. Thank you very much for sharing. Olia, this one's probably for you, I'd say. Thank you so much for your presentation. As someone who has not used Komodo, how frequently can you see the data or a report of what is going on with our borders?
So 24/7 is the answer to that. If you have the app on your phone and you have access to your phone, you have access to the data. We work with schools as to who has access to the different levels of data or how many students you can oversee. But anytime that you log into the app or into the software through the web page, you will see the information there. And what we find is as more time passes and more data goes through the system, the results and the interpretations become more meaningful and more valuable. And I think a thing to note on there is that depending again on how your school sets up the structure through Komodo, is you have access to individual student data, but also a combined cohort analysis of the data as well, which again, the more data that goes through it, the more meaningful the results are as you kind of continue to gather this, what ends up being longitudinal data.
Olia, what do you believe are a couple of key things schools should remember when beginning their process with Komodo?
I think student engagement is key. Yeah, you need your students to buy in. And this is, again, whether you're using Komodo or any other type of wellbeing survey or psychometric, is students need to feel empowered to use the resource. So making sure that you as staff are explaining the reasons why. You know, it's not a big brother move to be checking in and seeing how everyone is doing at every point of the day. It is because the staff want to be more accurate in their interactions. They want to, as you so brilliantly said, provide a bridge from student to their own wellbeing, but also from student to the pastoral care team or the people that are overseeing them. So I think the biggest part is the engagement, getting students on board and explaining the function of why you're gathering this information. Because if they can see how it's going to benefit them, they're going to buy in and they're going to be a part of it. I don't know if Nelly and Yusang, if that is what your experience was like, but from my perspective, that's what I would always be encouraging schools to do if they're starting out with Komodo.
Very good. And our final question, but I'm going to ask all four of our UWC Dilijan panel. Can you provide one final comment to schools who may be weighing up the decision on whether to move forward with Komodo or not? Madhu, might start with yourself.
I would say yes, because as a residential school, we care about the students' well-being the most. If they're well and emotionally healthy and mentally healthy, they can achieve their potential. And therefore, this is an opportunity to empower them, because young people need to understand their well-being, and especially in our school, the students will soon be leaving for, Yusang and Neles will soon be leaving for universities, where there will be no check-in from adults, and they will have to manage their own well-being. So it's a good start to empower them to learn how to manage their own well-being.
Very good. Nelly, we might jump over to you.
Yes, so I would also say definitely start using Komodo, because I think, as I mentioned before, and as Yusang said, it does provide that bridge. And and it makes it real, like well-being is something I think particularly in boarding schools that is talked about so often, and it is such a focus point. But it is, Komodo puts it, as I said, on paper, and it gives us actually something that we can work with in terms of having like a physical picture of where the school and the students are actually at, rather than it just being this concept that we talk about. So I think that's been very helpful. So I would definitely encourage any school to also start using it.
Yeah, very good. We'll go to you, Sung.
Absolutely, yes. Like in the end, it's a very, very useful tool that is very reliable, very easy to use, super user friendly. And in the end, the outcome that is actually produced from just a simple app with some surveys that are given to us in such a, let's say, in such an easy to feel way. In the end, it's a wonderful deal because from what people have mentioned before, the great effect that from the data that can be taken from these simple surveys, and such an easy way of using it, and that doesn't take that much time, so it's pretty much suitable to any kind of lifestyle, even our very kind of move club, class, homework, exam kind of lifestyle that we have here. I think it's just the perfect tool to empower us, to give data to the school, and pretty much benefit our well-being all around.
Very good, very well said. And last but certainly not least, John McKelly.
Yeah, thank you. No, I think, we should start with a point. We know how much well-being is the key to the future, both for young people as individual, but also as communities. So I think we should ask ourselves what we can do to improve how we support and promote the well-being of young people. And I think that a software like Komodo can actually help us to build and to promote a regular care in the school. So giving voice to students, making them proactive in asking for help, and also giving data to staff in order to reflect on what needs to be improved in the school, and basically promoting a culture of well-being that is somehow built in the school in the everyday life.
Very well said, and perfect timing, because that is the hour up, and that brings an end to our webinar today. And on behalf of ABSA, I'd just like to thank obviously Ilia and Komodo. Thank you so much for your presentation and facilitating today. Madhu, John McKelly, Nella, and Yusung, thank you all for being such a wonderful panel. We loved everything that you had to say, and we hope you can get some food in before breakfast finishes back over there in Dilijan. Thank you all for joining us. Ilia, do you want to say anything before we finish?
No, just a big thank you to you guys at ABSA. Thank you for hosting us. And I think, hopefully I've done it right. I have added into the chat box the Calendarly link. If anyone is wanting to take up that opportunity just to problem solve a little bit more, because those hours are up tomorrow.
No, very good. To everyone that was watching the webinar live today, thank you so much for joining us. We hope you enjoyed the webinar. For those that are going back and watching the recording, if you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to reach out to either ABSA directly or Komodo. We'll be very happy to answer those. Otherwise, thank you all again, and bye for now.
Bye.